Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea's car makers saw a decline in production and exports last month in terms of unit numbers, in part because of the global chip shortage. But exports actually surged dollar-wise by more than 12%. The South Korean health authorities are expecting a surge in coronavirus cases in the next few days, coming off the recent holiday weekend. Now the resort island of Jeju has effectively shut down for the season, implementing the highest level of social distancing. And a hero of Korea's fight for independence is laid to rest in his home country. The remains of General Beom-do, who led armies against Imperial Japan in the early 20th century, have been returned from Kazakhstan and were buried today in Daejeon. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. A year and a half ago, the start of the pandemic took a huge toll on major companies around the world. But new data show that in the first half of this year, compared to the first half of 2020, Korea's biggest firms have seen their operating profits double. Paeun-ji reports.
South Korea's large businesses seem to be slowly recovering from the economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. According to preliminary data from the business rating company CEO Score on Wednesday, in the first half of this year, operating profits of around 250 large enterprises in the country amounted to more than 100 trillion Korean won, or almost $85 billion. This is more than twice the amount compared to the same period last year. And compared to before the pandemic in the first half of 2019, it is an increase of around 65%. Tech firms especially saw the largest amount of sales growth, increasing more than 20% and totaling over $190 billion. This is mainly because of a stronger demand in home appliances and IT products, as more people stayed home amid the pandemic. Large sales growth was also recorded for businesses related to cars and auto parts, which went up by more than 26%. This was followed by petroleum products with 23% of sales growth, and steel with more than 24%. But sales by finance companies, including banks and insurance firms, were down by around 20% in the first half of this year. Paeun-ji, Arirang News.
South Korea's automobile industry last month saw a drop in production, domestic sales, and exports in terms of unit numbers. The main reasons were a factory shutdown so Hyundai could install new equipment and the ongoing shortage of the necessary computer chips. But in terms of dollar value, exports were actually up because people bought more of the expensive models. Kim Sung-min reports.
South Korea's automobile industry in July seems to be going through a tough time with three major performance indicators falling compared to a year ago. The country produced around 297,000 cars last month. That's 13.9% less than in July 2020. Production was dragged down by South Korea's largest car producer Hyundai Motor, halting production lines at its Asan plant for 4 weeks to install electric car production equipment. The ongoing global semiconductor crunch is also taking its toll on car production. Domestic sales and exports have also struggled. In terms of vehicles, sales dropped 9.6% and exports almost 3%. But the dollar value of those exports actually increased. Exports came to around $4.1 billion last month, jumping more than 12% on year. And it was the second biggest on record for the month of July. Experts say that it was because sales of luxurious cars like SUVs are flying up.
So after all, globally, the pandemic has prevented people from going traveling, and with the spare money, a lot of people turn to releasing their pent-up demand by buying expensive cars. In terms of situation in South Korea, the average price of exporting models has increased in general, and that has affected a lot.
He added that the global automobile industry is struggling as a whole due to supply issues. Though it is unclear, he believes it is going to take another 6 months for the industry to completely solve the chip bottleneck problem and get production back to normal. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
South Korea's southern resort island of Jeju has raised its social distancing measures to level 4, the highest level, which has effectively ended its busiest tourist season. From today until the 29th, the island will be closing all 12 beaches. And like in Seoul, gatherings are limited to 2 people after 6 p.m. Hotels are limited to 2/3 occupancy, and no more than 3 people can rent a car together or stay in the same hotel room, with exceptions for families and others who live together. Hotels, rental car services, and popular golf courses have reported a wave of cancellations. Starting this week, the South Korean government is paying out another round of relief funds for small businesses that have been hurt in the pandemic. Finance Minister Hong Nam-ki has been saying that 70% of this round will be paid out by the end of this month and 90% by the end of September. There will be payments for all but the highest earning people in Korea, and relief will be targeted toward those businesses that have been hit hardest. With the details on these latest payments, we have in the studio our very own Jang Tae-hyun. Good to see you, Tae-hyun.
Hi, Devin.
So fill us in on this latest round of relief money.
Sure. So some people are a bit confused about the relief funds and keep on asking, so how much am I getting? So firstly, individuals can get 250,000 won, or roughly $220 each, so long as they're not in the top 12% income bracket. That's relatively simple. So let's look at what businesses will get, because that's a bit more complicated. There are 2 types of financial aid for business owners: recovery funds and compensation for losses.
So for small businesses, 2 types of relief. You mentioned the recovery funds. This is a cash payment. Tell us about that.
Of course. So recovery funds are one type of financial support to help small businesses that have had a hard time operating due to the strict distancing measures applied nationwide. So the Ministry of SMEs and Startups previously announced that the amount paid will depend on how much a business normally makes in annual sales and how long it's been affected by the distancing measures.
First, we're providing extensive support for businesses affected by distancing measures and others hit by the pandemic. Second, we have designed the funds to provide strong support depending on the extent of damage. Third, people can quickly and easily receive the support.
Businesses that had to close completely for more than 6 weeks can receive up to 20 million won, or about $17,000. And those whose operating hours have been limited for more than 13 weeks can receive up to 9 million won, or about $7,700. Businesses with more than 60% drop in sales can receive up to 4 million won, or about $3,400. These funds will be rolled out in 4 rounds starting from August 17th. This first round is for businesses that received relief funds previously and that meet the conditions I just explained. There are some new businesses on the list, including optical stores and photo studios. The first round will help more than 1.3 million business owners, and on Tuesday, roughly 39% of these people have applied for the funds.
So as you were just explaining that, Taehyun, you mentioned that this round of relief payments has already started actually yesterday. So if someone's interested and wants to find out whether they can get it or not, what should they do?
So they should visit the website. It's called 희망회복자금.kr. Yes, that's in Korean. After entering the site and typing in their corporate registration number, the site will show whether their business is eligible for the first round of funds. To prevent the server from crashing for the first 2 days, businesses eligible for the first round can apply for the aid based on the last digit of the corporate registration number, odd numbers for Tuesday and even numbers for Wednesday. And from Thursday, all businesses can apply for the relief funds. After phone verification or authorization certification, people can see how much they can receive. Then people should fill out and submit the form. If people apply before 6 p.m. on Friday, they can get the money just 2 or 3 hours after submission. After that, it may take a little bit longer. People can call 1-899-8300 or use the chatting services for inquiries. I've talked to an official from the Ministry of SMEs, and she said there's no English translation.
Okay, so all of that covers the recovery funds, which is one of the two types of funds that you mentioned, and the other one was compensation for losses. Now that sounds like that might be a more targeted form of support. Tell us about that.
So the other type of funds is called compensation for losses, which will be paid at the end of October. A task force is working on the details regarding how to gauge the loss, set the range of support, and decide whether small business owners should participate in the deliberation committee. They're trying to find a way to support different industries hit hard by the stricter distancing measures applied in mid-July. That could include clubs and bars. There will be approximately 1 million recipients.
All right, that'll be some very useful information for those who are interested in getting support because, of course, everyone has been having a tough time during this past year and a half. We appreciate you coming on to explain that for us today.
Thank you.
South Korea is expected to report a rise in new cases of COVID-19 in the days ahead, coming off the recent three-day weekend. The authorities are looking at what to do about a possible shortage of hospital beds and whether to restrict travel from countries that have reported cases of the Lambda variant. Choi Min-jung reports.
South Korea on Wednesday reported 1,805 new COVID-19 cases, jumping by more than 400 from the day before. Usually, smaller numbers are reported earlier in the week due to fewer tests done over Saturday and Sunday. But the daily tally is expected to rise even further following the three-day weekend. All but 38 of Wednesday's cases were locally transmitted. Concerns are also growing over a shortage of hospital beds. As of Tuesday afternoon, only 35% of the beds for critically ill patients were available nationwide. And almost none are left in some regions including Daejeon and Chungcheongnam-do province. With the Lambda variant first identified in South America spreading to more than 30 countries, health authorities are considering excluding nations that are reporting this variant from quarantine exemptions.
We are currently reviewing with the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency whether to include countries reporting the Lambda variant on the quarantine list.
This comes as South Korea is currently exempting people vaccinated in South Korea from the 14-day quarantine on arrival back into the country. As for the vaccines, around 1.6 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine arrived in South Korea on Wednesday. This batch is part of the 66 million doses the government purchased directly from the drug maker. Another 1 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine produced at an SK Bioscience production facility will be distributed on Thursday. Concerning the delivery delay for the Moderna vaccine, authorities clarified that the total amount of vaccine supply for the year has been decided, but the specifics on the delivery schedules are usually decided through consultations. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
A Korean freedom fighter from the early 20th century has finally been laid to rest in his home country. That's General Beom-do, whose remains were repatriated last weekend from Kazakhstan, almost 80 years after his death. As the general was buried this morning in Daejeon, President Moon Jae-in said that his return will bring hope to all Koreans. Kim Min-ji reports.
The remains of General Beom-do have been laid to rest in his homeland 78 years after his death. A burial ceremony was held Wednesday at the Daejeon National Cemetery, attended by President Moon Jae-in and First Lady Kim Jong-suk, as well as other dignitaries. In a eulogy, Moon thanked the Kazakh government and ethnic Koreans there for helping to repatriate General Hong, calling him a hero and the pride of all Koreans.
장군의 귀환은 어려운 시기 서로를 믿고 의지하며 위기 극복에 함께하고 있는 대한민국 모든 국민들에게 큰 희망이 될 것입니다. 장군이 고향 흙에 흘린 눈물이 대한민국을 더 강하고 뜨거운 나라로 이끌어줄 것입니다.
Hong's burial followed a two-day mourning period after his remains were repatriated from Kazakhstan on Sunday, in connection with Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev's state visit to South Korea earlier this week. The president and first lady dusted the coffin with soil from both South Korea and Kazakhstan, brought by the Kazakh leader. Two types of flowers were displayed, chrysanthemums and carnations, symbols of condolence in each country. Hong served as a commander of the Korean Independence Army during Japan's 1910-45 colonial rule. He is famous for leading his troops to victory in major battles against Imperial Japan, including the Battle of Pongodong and Manchuria in 1920. The following year, Hong moved to the Russian Far East as Japanese oppression intensified, and was later deported to Kazakhstan in 1937 under the forced migration policy of then-Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. Hong died in 1943. On Tuesday, President Moon bestowed on the late general the highest Medal of Honor, the Order of Merit for National Foundation Republic of Korea Medal, for devoting his life to the fight for independence and contributing to public unity and nationalism. Hong was also a spiritual leader for ethnic Koreans or Korea-U.S in Kazakhstan. Moon vowed active support to preserve what used to be Hong's grave in Kazakhstan so that the pride of the Korea-U.S community there can go on. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
A memorial service was held this morning to mark the 12th anniversary of the death of former South Korean President Kim Dae-jung. Kim was president in the late 1990s and early 2000s and is known globally for his so-called sunshine policy of engagement with North Korea. The service this morning was held online by the Kim Dae-jung Peace Center. Eulogies were delivered by Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum, the Speaker of the National Assembly, and lawmakers from the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party. Politicians also paid their respects at the Seoul National Cemetery. Those including presidential hopefuls from the ruling Democratic Party, Lee Jae-myung and Lee Na-kyun, and a leading conservative contender, former Prosecutor General Yoon Suk-yeol. It's been a week since North Korea started ignoring the scheduled phone calls from the South in protest against joint military drills by South Korea and the U.S. There have been no particular signs of a provocation from the North otherwise. Experts say the North is contemplating what steps to take next, but may not have many options. Kim Da-mi reports.
North Korea has refused to answer calls from South Korea on their hotline for the past week in an apparent show of dissatisfaction over the Seoul-Washington summertime military drills. Observers say the regime is weighing its options in terms of provocations, but is finding them limited.
The U.S. Is in a very difficult situation right now with the Afghan pullout and the consequences there. And also, maybe North Korea doesn't really want to corner the United States.
Some are voicing concern over possible military action by the regime, but other experts say the North won't be able to find a clear rationale or good timing to present a major threat.
In order to engage in military provocations, there should be appropriate reasons, but high-intensity provocations could be a burden for the North if done only because South Korea and the U.S. didn't suspend the drills.
The expert also said the chances of the North answering calls on the hotline are remote, pointing to a comment from sister of the North Korean leader that the communication lines were restored only physically, nothing more or less. On the other hand, looking back at 2009, North Korea did respond on the military hotline just a day after South Korea and the U.S. ended that year's key resolve drills. This summer's training exercise by Seoul and Washington began Monday, largely based on computer simulations with no field training and on a smaller scale than the one held in March. Pyongyang has slammed Seoul and Washington for going ahead with the drills, warning that they will pay a price. While keeping a close eye on the North, Seoul's Unification Minister Lee In-young called on the North on Wednesday to return to dialogue within the year, and he said the momentum for the peace process on the Korean Peninsula will slow down due to political situations around the world. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
The rapid takeover of Kabul by the Taliban has raised questions in some quarters about America's commitment to some of its overseas missions. But U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says Washington has no plans to downsize or withdraw its troops from South Korea or Europe. Taking questions from reporters on Tuesday, Sullivan insisted that America's commitment to its allies and partners is sacrosanct and has always been so. The presence of American forces in Europe and Korea, he said, is aimed at defending against external threats and is fundamentally different from Afghanistan, which was in the middle of a civil war. The Taliban are trying to reassure the Afghan people and the world that they're not planning to impose the kind of brutal rule they did back in the 1990s. They held an unprecedented press conference on Tuesday in which a spokesperson said that a new government will protect the rights of women. Also, that Afghanistan won't be used to support terrorism in other countries. But major Western powers are insisting that they're not going to accept the Taliban as a legitimate government. Kim Yo-sun reports.
Following the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, the group held an unprecedented press conference during which they promised a number of things. A spokesperson from the militant group explained that they wished to forge peaceful relations with other countries.
I want to give assurance to the international community, including the United States of America, that Afghanistan will never be used against anyone. Also, I want to give assurance to the countries in the region and our neighbors that we will not allow Afghan soil to be used against our neighbors or other countries. Therefore, we want all the international community to be sure that we will abide by our commitments.
He also asserted that women's rights will be protected, but within the framework of Islam. The Taliban previously declared an amnesty across Afghanistan and also urged women to join its government. It also made clear that the war in Afghanistan was over, adding that it will wait until the departure of all foreign forces from the country before creating a new government.
Freedom is the right of all nations. The Afghan people, by using their legal right after 20 years of jihad, were able to take their freedom and clean their country from the occupation and occupiers.
The group also said that they wanted private media to remain independent, but highlighted that members of the press should not work against national values. While the Taliban seeks to portray themselves as more moderate than they were in the late 1990s, when they imposed a brutal rule on the country, many Afghans remain skeptical and rushed to flee the country. Washington is also wrapping up evacuation from the country, with the Pentagon explaining that it plans to have one plane traveling out every hour by Wednesday. Countries around the world are also responding to the Taliban's takeover, which is progressing faster than expected. China is rating itself for friendly relations with the militant group, with its foreign ministry spokesperson welcoming the chance for Beijing to deepen ties with Afghanistan, a country that shares a 76-kilometer-long border with China. Major Western powers, however, remain firm that they will not accept the Taliban as the country's rulers. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson stressed that nobody should bilaterally recognize the Taliban's new government. He also plans to convene a G7 meeting to discuss details with member nations. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
As we just heard, during their first news conference, the Taliban seemed to claim that they've changed their ways over the past 20 years, insisting that they will offer Afghan women some rights this time around. But many remain understandably skeptical of those claims, as hardly any women have been seen outside in Kabul since the takeover. Shin Ye-eun reports.
Things are moving quickly in Afghanistan. Just 2 days after taking over the heart of the country, Kabul, the Taliban held an official news briefing on Tuesday where they said women would have their rights protected within the framework of Islam.
Women will be afforded all their rights, whether it is in work or other activities, because women are a key part of society. And we are guaranteeing all their rights within the limits of Islam.
Also on this day, a Taliban spokesman appeared on the same screen with a female anchor. Beheshta Argand, a presenter from Tolo News Channel, interviewed a Taliban representative in the studio. The Taliban have even asked women to join their government, declaring an amnesty across Afghanistan. But their latest public stance on women is very different from when the Taliban previously ruled from 1996 to 2001. At the time, they restricted women from working and girls from going to school. Women also had to be accompanied by a male relative at all times if they wanted to leave their homes. The Taliban also administered punishments, including public stoning, in line with their strict interpretation of Sharia law, Islam's legal system. But whether the Taliban will truly protect the rights and lives of women is still the question. Photos of women that used to be on the walls of beauty salons and different stores have already been painted over. Hardly any women have been seen out on the streets of Kabul. And even if they were seen, they were all wearing burqas, what many deem to be the best armor to protect themselves. Although the Taliban hasn't yet mandated that women should wear full-body burqas like they did in the past, more women have been buying them in fear, which has seen the price of burqas increase 15-fold. Amid growing fear in the country, some women activists said they would not give up on what they've achieved so far.
Girls staying at home, if it becomes a norm, changing that would not be an easy task, and I don't want it to become a norm. Girls in schools are important, and I'm not willing to give up on that.
After the U.S. invaded Afghanistan in 2001, many restrictions on women were eased. International organizations had come together to provide girls with access to education and the liberty to live in peace. Whether this peace will remain is the main concern. 신예은, Arirang News.
And the UN will convene an emergency meeting next week to address human rights concerns in Afghanistan following the Taliban's takeover. The UN Human Rights Council says the August 24th meeting in Geneva follows a joint request by Pakistan and Afghanistan and was endorsed by nearly 90 countries. The UK and France backed the request, but China, Russia, and the U.S., which have observer status, were not among the supporting countries. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.